Kevin Courtois is the Executive Director of the Great Lakes Region and Government Affairs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. To achieve the U.S. Chamber's policy goals, Kevin cultivates and maintains legislative, political, media, and grassroots resources in Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Kevin leads the Chamber's efforts to strengthen its relationships with members of Congress through member businesses, associations, and local state chambers of commerce across the region. Before joining the Chamber, he spent 5 years in Washington, D.C., working for Senator Chuck Grassley's Finance Committee during his consideration of the Affordable Care Act. He also served as Senator Grassley's Judiciary Committee, where he handled health policy issues and federal judiciary nominations. While working on Capitol Hill, Kevin attended evening classes at the George Mason University School of Law before completing his last year at Northwestern's law schools in Chicago, where he currently resides. Please welcome Kevin.
Well, thank you, Bridget. It's an honor to be with you all today. And Bridget, I have to tell you, your energy and positivity was much needed this morning and deeply appreciated. So thank you for that introduction and a jolt of positive energy. And again, really honored to be with you all. And it's an honor to work with the Saginaw Chamber of Commerce. And for those of you who don't know, the U.S. Chamber, we're headquartered in Washington, D.C. I lead our Great Lakes Regional Office based here in Chicago, where I'm I guess broadcasting to you from today. We've covered it a bit, but we have to mention those events yesterday. And the reason we needed that positive energy is because I think as we all witnessed, those images from our U.S. Capitol yesterday were deeply disturbing. And as someone who has worked in those halls of Congress and on the Senate floor, I truly was shaken to my core. Veronica, I appreciate your leadership always. And I'm encouraged by your remarks this morning and the need to work together and the really a deep understanding of what it means for all of us on this Zoom meeting in terms of being part of the business community. We're often referred to the old cliches, that sane middle. We've been working, together as chambers of commerce and certainly with some efforts at the U.S. Chamber to rebuild the center, to find common ground and to find solutions to the problems that we faced. I was encouraged also to hear about your government affairs program and your dedication to that. It's because of that hard work, all of you, that we were able to get the types of responses we've seen to the COVID pandemic through things like the CARES Act back in March, and then most recently a second pandemic relief package that was passed the end of last year, and we'll get into that. What I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about, first we'll talk about the second pandemic relief package, and then we'll take a look at what to expect from the Biden administration. If you didn't see earlier this morning, just a few hours ago, Congress did execute its constitutional responsibility and voted to certify the Electoral College results. So we are looking ahead to this year. And after January 20th, the new Congress was sworn in on Sunday. And so we're looking ahead to what are the possibilities, what are the opportunities and the challenges we may face in this new Congress. Buried in the news yesterday was the election results in Georgia, where we were anticipating those since November. The two election results, so there was 2 Senate seats that were up there, and Democrats won both seats in there. And the implication is now we have a 50-50 split in the U.S. Senate, and with the tie-breaking vote going to the Vice President, Kamala Harris, Democrats will have control of the Senate effectively. There are some technical details, Senate procedure, where you'll see potentially co-chairs and how they're going to handle an actual 50-50 split, but we all understand the effective implications. So we'll go through some of that, and then I'd be happy to open it up to questions if we have time for that as well. So what I'm going to do is start sharing my screen here. and we'll get right into what is in this this second pandemic relief legislation. Before we do the outlook, I think what's really relevant, what I'm getting requests for now is, okay, so this pandemic relief legislation passed right before the holidays, and now businesses are wondering, what can we do? And for the small businesses on the line, and I know some that were in my breakout session, was really good to hear kind of things that you're up to. We can talk a little bit in more detail about some of the programs that you may want to take advantage of. But first, why did we need this second pandemic relief act? Remember when the CARES Act passed back in March, it was said, we want this to be a bridge to get us through to the other side. And what we saw was it effectively was a pier, right? There was a drop off because what we're seeing is a K-shaped recovery. Or what we would hope for was a V-shaped recovery. We had that steep drop off at the beginning of the pandemic. We've seen recovery in industries like technology, retail, and software services, but still industries that are hurting, travel, entertainment, hospitality, and a lot of small businesses are still hurting. Now you see here some of the industries that are still very much struggling: motion picture, sound recording industries, performing arts and spectator sports, travel, and accommodation still need assistance. So that was kind of the backdrop of getting a second pandemic relief package through Congress. So what was included? Well, it was $900 billion in total spending, almost 6,000 pages of legislation. A lot of that was because it's also paired with an end of the year spending bill. This was to keep the government funded through the end of the next fiscal year, through next September, and Congress was able to avoid a government shutdown. This was signed into law on December 28th, and these programs will be implemented over the course of the next few weeks and months. You see unemployment support there. So first was second round of stimulus checks, so that's outside of unemployment, but going around, you remember the first round of stimulus checks, $12,000 for individuals. This package included $600 stimulus checks, and then it enhanced those unemployment benefits, those enhanced unemployment benefits for 11 weeks, adding a federal add-on of $300 a week. Remember previously in the CARES Act, it was $600 a week. We think this will fit well in kind of what businesses needed in terms of people returning to employment, but also providing assistance for those that are unemployed. Small business support, you see the top line numbers there. We're going to go into a little bit more detail on what that means in terms of the Paycheck Protection Program and other programs involved. You see housing support there, the eviction moratorium that you may have heard about or read about, that is extended, and there's some funding in there for rental assistance, and then other various programs, all adding up to about $900 billion in a federal response. So I want to go over 4 programs here in a little bit more detail, and this is what we were talking about, specifically assistance for small businesses. I wouldn't tune out if you don't consider yourself a small business because you may still qualify. We're going to start with the Employee Retention Tax Credit, and this one didn't get as much attention in the last year in the CARES Act, mostly because it wasn't as accessible as the PPP. But if I can leave people with one takeaway here, it's going to be to pay attention to this tax credit. What does it do? So beginning January 1st of this year, 2021, it's a refundable and advanceable tax credit of up to $14,000 per employee. In terms of who can qualify, so generally if you have fewer than 500 employees and you've experienced more than a 20% decline in gross receipts in a quarter compared to that same quarter last year, or excuse me, in 2019, so pre-pandemic, then you can qualify for this tax credit. Specifically, it's a $7,000 per employee tax credit for 2 quarters of 2021, so a total of $14,000 per employee for both quarters, and it's authorized in law for the first quarter of 2021 and then the second quarter as well. Now, you may remember this tax credit from the original CARES Act back in last spring. It was a smaller credit. It was $5,000 per employee, and small businesses had to choose between taking a PPP, Paycheck Protection Program loan, and getting the Employee Retention Tax Credit. So a lot of people gravitated to the PPP because, frankly, it was a better deal. So important here in this new bill, Congress has removed that prohibition about taking advantage of both. So now, if you've got a PPP and if you received a PPP in 2020, you can take advantage of the Employee Retention Tax Credit in 2021. and you may even be able to apply part of it looking backwards as part of your expenses in 2020. So this is really a brand new opportunity for a lot of small businesses, and frankly, a more generous opportunity than what was originally included in the CARES Act. Now, how do you file for this credit? It's a little bit different than how you file for tax credits on, say, business expenditures, and that's what makes it even more attractive. So most of us think about tax credits and we think about, okay, well, if you know April 15th, I'm doing my taxes and I can take advantage of a credit then. Well, this is a tax credit that's applied again, against what employers remit from withholding. So for the typical payroll tax withholding, which obviously means it's much more frequently. It's also a refundable credit. So meaning that if your expenses, your eligible credit exceeds your level of taxes, that the IRS sends you a check for the difference between your taxes paid or what you would have paid and what you're eligible for this tax credit. And importantly, you can even apply at the IRS to receive an advance on this tax credit to help with cash flow issues. It's what's called an advanceable tax credit. So it's a really great opportunity for small businesses, particularly those with 500 or fewer employees. And if that's you, it's great to start talking to your tax accountant. I know Veronica mentioned the Chamber, of course, as always, will help coordinate and keep you updated on these issues and how you can take advantage of the tax credit, the employer retention tax credit, some of your wage expenses for those first 6 months of 2021. So in addition to the 2021 advanced tax credit, one of the things you want to ask, like whoever prepares your taxes, is to look back at 2020 and see if you're able to claim the tax credit for some of the wages that you paid your employees in calendar year 2020. Now note, so in 2020, it was only a $5,000 credit, and it's not as generous as the $14,000 maximum credit for 2021, but still $5,000 per employee. It's worth taking to your tax preparer to find out if you can take advantage of all that from last year as the year has just closed. Now, if you use a payroll company, you can also check with them to see if you're eligible. The IRS released guidance to the payroll companies for the earlier version of the tax credit to help them with processing these and implementing this on your behalf. So if you use one of those companies, you want to talk to them. We expect they'll have a lot of information as they roll this out, and you could kind of take advantage of this and the PPP. And really, that's the biggest difference of what's in this new bill and what's attractive for a lot of the folks out there. Now, next up, you see a second draw of the PPP loans, so which is the forgivable loan, and it's up to $2 million now in this new legislation. It has all the similar features of the original PPP, but it's a bit more targeted to those small businesses that were hit the hardest, those on the bottom half of that K-shaped recovery we were talking about, and those who have exhausted their first PPP loan. The exceptions for the second draw are that you have to have 300 or fewer employees. That's down from the 500 employees under the original PPP program. You also have to meet a revenue reduction test. So under the original PPP program, it was simply an attestation that your business was being harmed economically by the pandemic, or it might be harmed. Here you have to demonstrate, for the second PPP draw, you have to demonstrate that you've had a reduction in gross receipts in a quarter in 2020 of 25% or greater relative to that same quarter back in 2019. So if your business was only off about 5%, you won't qualify for that second draw PPP, even though you may have qualified for that for the first round of the PPP program. Importantly, here you have to exhaust your original PPP loan in order to get this second draw. That doesn't mean you have to have completed the entire forgiveness process. You simply just have to expend all the funds that you have received under the original PPP by the time you receive the second PPP loan. As far as timing, when you can apply, so we are waiting for the Small Business Administration to reopen the portal for the original PPP program and the second draw, and we're going to keep you updated as they issue guidance and how you can apply for this. So another point to make here is that this law, the second round, this most recently passed law, reopens the original PPP program. Since it was shut down last September, it was not issuing any new loans. It will reopen and issue new loans to small businesses that meet those original qualifications and haven't yet received a loan. So when the Small Business administration, when they open the portal, release the guidance, if you've never received a PPP loan, you have the opportunity to go to your lender and apply for first draw, an original PPP loan. If you have received that PPP loan and you've exhausted it and you meet the qualifications we were just talking about, the revenue reduction in the 300 or fewer employee requirement, then you can go to your lender, fill out the application for the second draw of the PPP. You might not get as much money. The caps are a little bit different. As I mentioned, it was $10 million that first round. Now it's at a $2 million cap, but it's a great opportunity for those businesses who've used up original PPP funds and are still struggling. Mostly the rules are the same for the original and the first draw. Some of those differences, we've discussed. There's one significant change that's really positive for businesses, and the single most important one is the taxability of your PPP loan. This was an issue we heard quite a bit about as we all were working through this brand new program that the government stood up last year. So in this bill, Congress clarified that your PPP loan forgiveness is not taxable. And in addition to that, the expenses that you paid with your PPP loan, they remain deductible as ordinary business expenses, just as you would deduct that expense if you were to have used other revenue to pay for it. That was in response to an IRS decision that came out that caused a lot of heartburn for PPP loan recipients last year, and it was a positive change as a result of some really good, strong advocacy efforts. So in sum, there's really no tax consequences for receiving that PPP loan. Now, the other change to the original PPP is the list of eligible expenses for which you can use your PPP loan, and has been expanded. So it now includes the expenses that small businesses have made to comply with public health measures. So for example, you installed plexiglass, or you built a drive-through window, you created partitions to comply with public health recommendations. So those expenses are now forgivable PPP expenditures. The same is true if you have essential supplier goods like perishable items that you order for your business and they're essential to the operation. Those can count as eligible expenses for which you can receive forgiveness. The one important caveat for this program, however, is that the 60-40 rule, it remains in effect. So that rule says that 60% of your expenses, of the total, 60% of your expenses of your total amount of the loan forgiveness has to be for payroll expenses related to paying your employees. So you can increase loan forgivability because of these other expenses, but still 60% of your PPP loan must go towards paying your employees. The new stimulus package also set aside PPP money specifically for minority-owned businesses, probably the most important set aside, very similar to what happened when the PPP was replenished last summer. For these set-asides are for community development, financial institutions, and small credit unions and small banks. So there's money in the PPP that's set aside for loans for these institutions. In addition, there's set-asides for businesses with 10 or fewer employees who are receiving smaller loans, so those under $250,000, located in some low-income areas. We're waiting for some guidance and SBA determinations on how they are implementing that, but there's going to be some prioritization and some set-asides to ensure those businesses in low-income areas receive these loans. And lastly, on PPP, Veronica, I know we've discussed this and we've probably discussed more, but the legislation changed the rules to allow eligibility to 501c6 nonprofit organizations. The original CARES Act only included 501c3 nonprofits. And Congress recognized after a lot of advocacy efforts that 501c6s, commonly chambers of commerce, direct marketing, travel and tourism associations, they now qualify for this PPP program. There are some eligibility requirements, which we don't have to go into too much details about, surrounding lobbying in certain percentages, but we will have more details to help chambers of commerce and those organizations as they seek the PPP loan. Okay, so next up, the third program is the first program on this slide. The third program we're talking about is the EIDL grants. So this is the second this is the second slide, or sorry, the third program that we're going to talk about. So you remember these EIDL grants from the first bill last year. This is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and that's a typical loan program operated by an SBA. It was in existence pre-pandemic. That will be reopened and taking new loans. But in addition to that, there was a targeted grant of $10,000 for small businesses included in the CARES Act. Now, this money ran out several times, and a lot of businesses thought they were going to get $10,000, and they only ended up getting, $1,000 or $2,000. So Congress has re-upped this program with a little bit of a twist. They're giving a priority for small businesses that have 300 or fewer employees that are located in a census tract that's eligible for the new market tax credit. So if you don't know if that applies to you or not, I think you can Google new market tax credit maps and pull up the map. You can see the census tracts to see if you qualify. You had to experience a 30% reduction in gross receipts for an 8-week period between March 2nd, 2020 and the end of the year, compared to a similar 8-week period either before the pandemic or in the prior year. If you meet all those qualifications, then you're going to be at the front of the line to receive the full EIDL grant, full $10,000. If you never received one, you can get that full $10,000. If you received a partial grant in 2020, you can reapply to get the remaining of that up to $10,000. So this is another great opportunity, particularly for small businesses located in low-income areas, to access a grant and specifically set aside for them, and it's a grant you don't have to repay. So the other program included in this bill was for a grant to live venue operators. That means if you're a live event business, theater, producer, live performing arts organizations, museums, independent motion picture theater, or talent representative, then you're going to want to pay attention to that live event grant program. It's specifically tailored and designed for those businesses and offers more money than the PPP program. And it's a direct grant rather than a forgivable loan. So for those programs, the EIDL grants and the live venue grants, you're going to go straight to the Small Business Administration. The SBA is going to administer both of those programs as opposed to going to your lender and with PPP. Now, neither are really currently up and running yet, but they will be in the days and weeks ahead. So you're going to want to familiarize yourself with the SBA website and prepare yourself for when they begin taking those applications. And just to differentiate here, so if you're thinking about a PPP loan, either a first loan because you never received one, or part of the second draw, that's going to be through your banking institution. And you're going to want to be getting ready, talking to your lender and your bank and getting your applications for the original or the second draw. Then if you're focused on the employee retention tax credit, you're going to want to talk to your tax preparer, your accountant, your bookkeeper, or the payroll company, whoever helps you with your payroll tax submissions. That's who you'll talk to for that. And you also may be in a situation where you're pursuing multiple programs at once. So just remember, you're going to be going to different institutions to receive these benefits. And I'm sure this is an area where Veronica and the Chamber of Commerce can help you navigate this process. Now, I want to move on from that overview of this pandemic relief legislation. I guess first, a little plug for some helpful guides that the U.S. Chamber provides. You can go to uschamber.com/coronavirus to get our guide for the PPP loan forgiveness, a number of other ones. We're updating these regularly when SBA issues new guidance, and these are helpful 1 to 4 page guides to help you prepare as you're applying for some of these grants, loans, and for forgiveness. What was not in that pandemic relief legislation very quickly was the liability protections for businesses and schools. These two, and then state and local aid. So these two were negotiating chips for both sides. We'll continue advocating for liability protections. Know that's very important to the business community and to schools. And we also support providing state and local aid. And this is a good segue into kind of what we're looking at kind of moving ahead is we have a new Congress and a new administration, because there is a good possibility of additional pandemic relief as we all of us continue working our way through the pandemic and hopefully to the other side soon. You saw there was President Trump had been proposing a $2,000 stimulus check as opposed to $600. I wouldn't be surprised if that's revisited, as many Democrats do support it. And then also that state and local aid that was being proposed by Democrats. I wouldn't be surprised if that was also revisited, and it's an area where we'll continue to push for liability protections for businesses and school. So I used to give a presentation preparing for the 3 different outcomes of the election, and I thought I had prepared for what we were considering kind of a split Congress, right? Republican control of the Senate. Now, of course, we mentioned earlier the election results in Georgia. Well, that's going to change the assumption I had after the election. So we're looking at unified Democratic control in government. Of course, it's a very slim margin in the Senate, and then a slimmer margin than the previous Congress in the House of Representatives, as Republicans picked up seats there. I want to highlight the importance here of bipartisanship, of cooperation, of working together. That centrist middle is going to be ever more important when we have slimmer margins if we're to get anything done. Some assumptions we were operating under this scenario were that the potential, there's been talk about repealing the filibuster. That's the requirement that in the Senate for legislation to proceed, it needs to receive 60 votes. So in this case, you would have to get, assuming all Democrats stick together, you'd have to get 10 Republican votes to advance legislation. Now, the filibuster has been repealed for nominations. That's one of the big implications of this of Tuesday's election, was nominations will now go through a lot easier. Again, assuming Democratic unity in the Senate. We're going to see aggressive regulatory actions. So initially focused on undoing Trump's actions, the kind of deregulation that we saw during the Trump years. And just as a side note, as you know, over the years, Congress has either delegated authority to the executive, or the executive has used their authority to implement a lot of the policy actions that maybe previously would have gone through Congress. This is something that is difficult for businesses because we like predictability. And when we have a change in administration and a change in party controlling the executive branch, we see more and more of these swings where, although they may implement policies that are helping us now, we'll see those reversed once a new executive is there. So we're going to be keeping a close eye on this, remaining vigilant. We see enforcement being used as a policy tool, decisions made by the executive branch. Also using government purchasing, so procuring. The government buys a lot of stuff, goods and services, and putting in kind of policy decisions into those contracts with private entities that they do business with. See a kind of a change in oversight focus. So where we might have a Republican oversight of a Democratic administration, if depending on how the Senate is organized, we may see more oversight of private entities, of businesses, of corporations. We saw this kind of after the 2008 financial crisis, when there was increased oversight of banks. And finally, the trend we've been seeing is the state attorneys general have been more and more active on both parties. So whatever party is controlling the White House, and implementing, whether it's an executive order, implementing a new law, making decisions there. We're seeing state AGs of the same party kind of band together in lawsuits and challenging it. It used to be that attorney general in the states is kind of a sleepy position, but it's not the case anymore. A lot of are more high profile, and we're hearing more and more from them as they band together in this new kind of way of challenging executive actions at the federal level. So some of the policy areas that, in terms of what we can expect, so the employment, labor, workplace policies, possible return to the PRO Act and card check debate, immigration reform, which is something that the U.S. Chamber has been advocating for some time. I think it could bubble up as another potential policy area. Of course, paid leave, some revised antitrust laws, restricted use of arbitration, something that we're very active in defending, the use of arbitration, corporate disclosures, and liability. So in an under a tax bill. So if we were operating under assumption of a Republican Senate, I think that was kind of a safeguard to protecting the tax bill in 2017, the tax cuts from 2017. We may see those under some threat. Again, it's going to depend on filibuster rules and what can be used in something called budget reconciliation. Something that, again, we'll be kind of remaining vigilant on, as those were, a very important update for the business community. And so restricted stock buybacks, you see back in infrastructure, environment and energy. So we hope that what I was mentioning earlier, this working together, rebuilding the center, finding common ground, perhaps the events yesterday will wake us all up to focusing on where we can find common ground. Infrastructure is a great place to start because we already know there's bipartisan support, and we already know that I may have lost my screen share, but we already know that there's support, and we already know that that it's something that we can find common ground on. What's dividing us, of course, is how to pay for it. Now is, there's no better time than now to really buckle down and decide, all right, how are we going to pay for this? If we all agree this is something we need to get done. Almost all of the states in my region have themselves enacted some type of infrastructure plan. Kentucky is still kind of figuring out how they would pay for their state plan, but time for the federal government to step up and do that. We're calling for an infrastructure package by the July 4th recess. We want to see that get done. I think that's an area where we'll find a starting point. So COVID relief, additional COVID relief, an infrastructure package. Say those are kind of the first two areas. Congress, as they get organized, are going to begin figuring out their own internal rules, and the administration is going to start sending over nominees. And this is something we'll pay close attention to. It's going to be a bit easier for President-elect Biden to confirm his nominees now that they have the votes in the Senate. So I had a couple slides, but I am not 100% confident that I am still sharing my screen. So as I figure out this technology, I see a few people shaking their heads. I will end there. Thank you again for having me this morning. And Veronica, and to all the chamber members and your chamber staff, thank you for your consistent and strong partnership, especially over this last year, and all that you're doing for your members. And we stand by ready to help at the U.S. Chamber however we can.